Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Let's take it over, Chaitanya Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. So we are devoting. Radha, you want to start the record? It's recording. Okay, good. Okay.
Should I read the verse and then?
Yeah, I'm just doing that right now, giving you the access so everybody can see the verse also. So we are covering one chapter in each session, and we are covering different verses or key themes from each chapter. So this is the third chapter. We'll discuss the topic of what impels us toward self-destruction. Yes.
I'll read the Sanskrit. You can listen to it. It's very beautiful. Arjuna vacha atha kena prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anicham api varshneya balad iva niyojita.
Arjuna said, O descendant of Vishnu, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force?
Thank you. So, when I encountered the Bhagavad Gita seriously, I grew up in India where the Bhagavad Gita was a part of the as a symbol of Hindu piety. So I had memorized some verses in my childhood, and I won some competitions for verse recitation. But after that, I never thought of a book as very relevant. But in my college years, when I was reintroduced to the Bhagavad Gita, that was the time when I read the Gita, this verse struck me very forcefully. So I'll try to explain what this verse is saying, and then we will look at it from various perspectives. So, atha kena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha. So it is something which is, say, good. Now we'll talk about good and bad later in terms of what means. Something which is good, and we want to go in that direction. But there seems to be some force inside us which pushes us in the opposite direction. And we've all experienced this to various degrees. May want to eat healthy, but something within us seems to push us towards toxic foods. May want to avoid substance abuse, and sometimes seems to push us towards that which is harmful. So there is this self-destructive force that is there inside us. So in this verse, Arjuna is asking, what is this force? So he's asking two things. What is this? What is the identity of the force? And he used two characteristics of the force, that Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyena Miha Vairinam. So he says one characteristic of this self-destructive force, that it is Mahashano. It is all devouring. That it is, in one sense, he's saying that it knows no boundaries. Nothing is sacred for this force. Once a person, say, becomes hooked to something, a person becomes addicted, then that person gets pushed in any and every direction. So anything can be violated. A person can rob, a person can lie, a person can wound, a person can kill, when they are driven by this desire. Mahashano Mahapapma.
So there is no moral compass.
Yeah, there's the moral compass is destroyed by it. And he says, it is almost as if it steals away our will. So it says that it knows no boundaries, and it makes us helpless. So what is this force and how do we deal with it? That is what Krishna will address in subsequent verses. So this question comes, this particular section in the Bhagavad Gita, we are discussing the third chapter right now. The third chapter has 43 verses. So 36th verse is the question, and from 37 to 43 will be the answer that Arjuna is giving, that Arjuna will be getting from Krishna. So this is a quick introduction of what the verse is saying. What is this force which knows no boundaries and which seems to take away our free will? Any further reflections on the verse itself?
Yeah, when you sent this to us last night, and said we'd be talking about self-destructive forces, usually when you send us what we're talking about, I'm like, oh gosh, I have no idea what that is about. But you sent me this and I'm like, all right, I got this one. I can talk about self-destruction all day long. So yeah, this is this is a good one. And the other thing, I was having a conversation. I went back to Michigan this week to see my grandmother, and she was kind of asking me some questions about Hinduism, like what is Hinduism? And what I told her, you guys please correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of simplified it. I was like, well, first off, Hinduism is really just a word that was coined by the British to kind of like encompass all of India culture. But second off, well, actually the conversation started because my grandma was noting that my husband and I have different religious paths. My husband's Catholic and I follow this practice. And so she was kind of asking me like, oh, so what is Hinduism? How is it the same? Is it different? And I was like, well, it's kind of like we're going to Missouri. I'm like, well, our marriage works because we both are really connected at the cores and the values. It's kind of like we're going to Missouri, but we're taking different routes to get there. But ultimately, the destination is the same, which is love of Godhead. And that's really what we choose to focus on. The thing that I like about this path is that in my experience, in other paths, sometimes it gets so caught up in the rules and regulations that the identification of the path becomes the rules and regulations. But this path really, in my experience with it, leads with relationship. And in that way, you learn that the purpose of the rules and the regulation is to enhance the relationship. And when you experience such a high relationship, you really want to follow the rules and the regulations. And so something like this, where we talk about self-destruction, prior to coming in this, it was so hard to make good decisions for myself because, again, I was just making good decisions for myself because I was told that's what I should do. And for me, like, that was sometimes hard for me to buy into, like, why? What's the reasoning? Like, it was just kind of like white knuckling it. But when I learned a higher love through the Bhagavad Gita, it made making better decisions for myself, like things that were less destructive, almost like second nature, because I had a reason to. So those are the things I thought of when you sent out this subject. This one I'm really has been transformational for me. It's like the first time I was actually able to get a hold on some of these behaviors in like a real sustainable way.
Thank you. Beautifully put.
That's nice.
That I just tried to depict it. Let me know if we just focus on rules directly, or rather, instead of calling it Gita's path, if some spiritual path, it focuses only on rules, then it can seem very rigid. But if it focuses on relationships, then when we follow the rules, then it becomes easier to follow.
Yep. Yeah, and you want to follow them. It becomes like your reason for following them. Yeah. Okay, almost like when a mom, like when a person becomes a parent, and they because they have something bigger than themselves to care for and to love, those things like going out and partying, or their lifestyle changes just naturally because they want to, where before it maybe would have been super hard just to do for no reason. Is that a good comparison?
Yeah, beautiful. when every relationship brings with it some obligation. But if there is love in the relationship, then that obligation actually brings, you could say, greater intimacy in the relationship. It improves the relationship. But if there is no love, then that obligation seems very restrictive. That obligation seems to be depriving us. So when we start with the focus on relationships, so relationships inevitably will bring obligations. Like you said, just being any relationship, we become a parent. Even we have a partner, we have friends. Every relationship brings an obligation. Now, when there is love, that obligation leads to deepening of the relationship. But when there is no love, then that obligation simply it makes us feel restricted. It seems it makes us feel suffocated. So yes,
that was exactly my experience, because when I came into this, I started chanting, and it's a practice that my teacher Raghunath taught pretty much as soon as I came into it. And I was always into meditation, so I kind of took a liking to this chanting. I found it very relaxing and soothing. But the thing that was different about this particular mantra that we chant in this tradition was I felt so much relationship. And then the more I did it, the more I felt relationship. Before really any of the other philosophy I came to know, it was just really kind of nurturing that relationship. And then coming into this, it was like, okay, yeah, now I'm into this. Before it was like, how do I find a way around it so that I can still look like I'm doing it, but not really. Now it's like, okay, no, now I'm sincerely into this.
Yeah.
Another thing that I noticed what you're saying is that, in the material world, everyone has relationships. And especially when we're looking at relationships between a man and a woman, or between partners, then initially there is a lot of love. And as time goes by, more and more people take shelter of the rules within the relationship, and then starts to become more and more dry to the point of like, it's not worth it. So it's very interesting how when we use love as the binding component, then everything is so sweet. And when that love is missing from the overall picture of things, then it becomes a chore, it becomes tedious, it becomes very difficult to maintain and sustain. And therefore, we're trying to always see how we can rekindle that love again, somewhere, somehow. So that's something that I've always believed in my own practices, that that we should not legislate relationships. We should inspire relationships, and we should guide our lives through inspiration, and rather than legislation, and guide our relationships through inspiration and then legislation. So yeah, it's a very good point that you make. And especially in this verse, I often think another...
Just 1 minute, bro. This 1 minute. My comment on this particular point.
Yes.
It's beautiful. I think one of the major reasons why in today's world many people feel put off by what they consider traditional religion is because there is too much emphasis on rules and regulations. There's a atheistic gag against Christianity that could apply to any religion. It says that in the Bible, the Old Testament, there is this, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So there's one atheist who said that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no. No, you can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do that. So that when it becomes the central defining experience of people when they're practicing any religion, or anything. What it may be spiritual, but for them it just seems restrictive and regressive. So it is important that there be inspiration, and inspiration can come from various sources. It can at one level can come from the philosophical wisdom itself, and it can also come from the people who are practicing it. Right. In both ways, many things would can come from the philosophical wisdom, and it can come from the practitioners, those who are practicing, those who are teaching. So when that inspiration is there, only then it can move forward. Otherwise, it becomes difficult to sustain. Yes, please go ahead.
Inspiration also comes from observing others' joy and happiness on a particular spiritual path, and also one's individual's execution of a particular spiritual path or practice. Inspiration, I feel it comes from deep within oneself, and it's not necessarily always have to be from outside, because I've noticed whenever we watch, like motivational videos, we just keep watching one after another, and we're still sitting on the couch after an hour, So somehow that inspiration is not happening, because something is missing inside,
I think what really for inspiration, like that's why association is so big in our path. Is that right? Because it's like I know when I hang out with somebody who is really on fire, like my friend Gokul, it makes me feel on fire. But if I hang out with somebody who's really into something like shopping or improving their looks, or then it makes me feel like I want to do that. So if we spend more time with the people that are working on developing this kind of love for God and growth within themselves, then we become more like that. Right?
Yeah, perfectly true. I often talk about, let's quickly respond to this. See, we often talk about desires, or we often think of desires as linear. Say, this is some tempting object. So we're talking about self-destructive desires over here. So it could be, let's put it, not just tempting object, it could be any attractive object. Tempting generally has a negative connotation. Just any object that attracts. It could be good, it could be bad. So we generally think of desires as linear. That we see a desirable object and then we get the desire for it. But in many things in life, actually, especially the uplifting things, for them, the desires are not usually linear. They are more triangular. So what that means is, suppose I just see an exercise machine. It's not very often that suddenly I'll start developing the desire to do exercise. But if I see a friend doing exercise and that person is becoming fitter, healthier, and then seeing them helps us to develop the desire much more. So in general, we can say for things which are sensually attractive, linear desires are natural. But things which are linear desires are there, but for things which are maybe beneficial but not sensually attractive. So for example, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, it's not that suddenly just by seeing the Bhagavad Gita, people will say, oh, I want to read it. Some people may, those who love books, but for most people, how it will work is they associate somebody who is reading the Gita, who is living the Gita, who is relishing the Gita, who is sharing insights on the Gita. And then they get, oh, what is there in this Gita? I want to know about it. So for these things, generally the desires grow in a triangular way. And that's why, as I said, that if you want to develop something healthy, this triangular desires are so important. If we see, okay, we may read about meditating. Okay, maybe I'll meditate one day. But if a friend starts meditating, or if you make friends with people who are meditating, then, hey, let me try this out. So this triangularity of desires is important. And with respect to self-destructive desire also, if you want to replace that with healthy desires, now we need to change the crowd we hang out with. Yeah, please.
So I was just kind of saying, so we have destructive desires. We recognize them, and this is kind of like a tool in our toolbox to combat them. Is to find people that are in places that are higher and to spend time with them.
Yes. In general, I was going to Krishna talks about two things when you're combating. I'll just use the self-destructive desire. I'll use short STD. Krishna talks about two broad things: boundaries and bonds. So boundaries means if say I am here and here is something self-destructive that I'm attracted to, then it is important for me to create some kind of boundary between this me and that. So some kind of boundary means something which will make it relatively a little more difficult for me to go from here to there. So whatever it may be, if a person is alcoholic, then if they want to give up alcohol, if their house is right next to a bar, or there is a bar right in their house, then it's going to be very difficult for them to give it up. So that is the first part of boundary. Krishna talks about this in 340. Tasmatam indriyanyadav niyamya bharatarshava. And then bonds is what you said about these two things. It's healthy association. We need to have healthy association, and then we begin to bond with those people. And then we try to bond with healthy actions, or in association, we have healthy commitments. We start the way to give up a unhealthy habit is to actually develop a healthy habit. So to the extent we can bond ourselves with these two things, to that extent we can combat it. So this bonding aspect Krishna talks about in 343 later.
Yeah, so in essentially what you're saying is that our inherent nature is not something that we can change overnight, but we have to gain a higher taste, as is in the second chapter, I think, Vishaya Vinivartante, that verse.
Yes,
that explains that, we are going to have, drinking habits. Sure, how can we drink something healthy? We're going to have smelling habits. How can we develop good habits of smelling and using all our senses to give them a higher taste, thereby superseding the unhealthy association with things and people.
Yes. So in one sense, you put it this way, that if say this is our consciousness, and say our consciousness is right now filled with some unhealthy attachment, which is like red in color, but that is not what is all there. We might have some healthy interest, some healthy habit. So what we need to do is, if we whatever we give our attention to, we can choose to give our attention here or here. So we can give our attention to a healthy habit, we can dwell on it, we can spend time on it. Whatever in the Bhagavad Gita says in the second chapter, or it's a paraphrase of the Bhagavad Gita, whatever gets our attention gets us. We can imagine our consciousness to be like a phone screen. There are multiple notifications there. Whichever notification we click, that grows. So the clicking, giving attention, is like clicking a notification. So when we click that notification, that grows. So if we are only trying to decrease the unhealthy habit, try to get rid of it, that's very difficult. But if we just focus on the healthy habit and let it grow, then gradually what will happen is, the healthy habit will occupy our consciousness, and then the unhealthy will become smaller and smaller, till eventually healthy habits fill our consciousness, and when they are filled like that, then the unhealthy is not so much driven out as it is crowded out. If we try to drive out, then it becomes difficult. That means what we are trying to, this is crowding it out. Many times we focus on what I want to give up. That means what we are trying to do is, I don't want this here, and I get the unhealthy. We try to push this unhealthy habit out. Even if we succeed in pushing it out, what is there to fill this in? Nature abhors a vacuum. So this is trying to driving out. So don't focus so much on, say, giving up alcohol. Okay, if I were free from alcohol, what would I do with my life? What is it that I am inspired to do? What is it that I feel can make a contribution? What is it that I would give me satisfaction if I look back at the end of my life at death and look back and see, this is what I did something worthwhile. So to the extent we can focus on filling our life with that, we will be able to drive out the unhealthy. And that is what the Gita focuses on, giving us a meaningful purpose for life.
So it's almost like you have a glass of water with some dirt in it, and instead of like reaching your hand in there to try to get the dirt out, you just like continually pour fresh, clean water in, and eventually the dirt will come out as the water cup overflows, like that.
Yeah, good example. I would prefer to use same instead of dirt, let's put air. If you want to remove air from a glass, how can you remove it? Even if you create a vacuum, a little imbalance, and the air will rush in. But if you fill the glass with water, then automatically, if you fill it with water, the air will go out. So in that sense, that's why I use the word example of air. If you have this will become more like a bucket than a glass. But okay. So if you just try to drive out air, it's like, okay, something has to fill that glass. Even if we succeed in driving out, we might create a perfect vacuum. But so like that, okay, I'll have no desires at all. But then a perfect vacuum can be very easily disturbed. Similarly, a perfect state of, some people say, desirelessness. Okay, you might get there, but a little imbalance, suddenly some desire will be triggered. Oh, I want to do this. I want this. So instead, what we do is, we focus on filling it with water to the brim. And once it is filled with water, then naturally the air is driven out. The air has no space left. Does this make more sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Vedaprabhu, you want to say something?
No, I like this metaphor of the air. I normally use, I also use the metaphor, I like the water metaphor.
Yeah.
But this makes sense.
So just to take this forward then. So I was talking about his bonds and boundaries and bonds. So self-destructive desire. Now we may say, where does it come from? So to understand this, sometimes we feel, why do I have such dark desires? Why do I work against myself? So here, it's helpful to understand how our mind works. If we consider, we have discussed this earlier, there is the mind, and then below that, there is the soul. And then, of course, there's the physical level. The body or the physical level. So now, every time we do an action, there is an outer result and there is an inner result. Now, the inner result of the action is that an impression is formed. The word impression in Sanskrit is called as samskar. Now, what is this inner result? What is the inner result? This impression leads to proposition. To do it again. So if somebody drinks once, then the proposition comes, drink again. So proposition can be called as pravritti, can be called as vasana. We'll look at Sanskrit words a little later if we need to, but it leads to proposition. Now when this proposition comes up, then again there's a repetition of the action. The repetition has some outer result and again an inner result. Now, the inner result is that the impression gets reinforced. And if this keeps going on and on and on happening, then eventually the impressions become so strong that there is very little of a distance between the proposition coming and then the action getting repeated. So when we repeat a particular action again and again and again, then the propositions become two things. They become stronger and faster. So it comes out with greater force and with greater velocity. Like an alcoholic, somebody who drinks for the first time, second time, think maybe should I drink, should I not drink? Or somebody who's drunk regularly, the thought I shouldn't drink doesn't even pass through their mind. I have to drink. I have to drink. So that is how, for some people, those cravings may become very strong. Now, as I said, the Sanskrit word for this is samskara. Now, this can also be said as samskar. Everybody has some or the other scar in their psyche. Everybody is scarred by some or the other unhealthy habits. But fortunately for us, the mind in one sense is mechanical. That means that what applies to unhealthy habits also applies to healthy habits. The same process. If we start doing something healthy, if we decide every day I'll spend some time chanting mantras, every day I'll spend some time hearing the Bhagavad Gita, studying the Gita. And if we do it once, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times, then that will be repeated. And then those impressions will be formed. And those impressions, so though what will happen is, positive impressions, if we form them, they will eventually override the negative impressions. And that's how the negative impressions can be, the influence on us can be decreased. Sometimes we say, I have willpower, I will not do this, I will not do this. Okay, that's good to think of. But if the inner impressions are very strong, then the proposition is going to come. And willpower alone is not enough. Yeah, willpower is required, but we use willpower not just to resist inner impressions, but we use it to, is not so much to resist negative impressions. I will not do this. That is not very helpful, because we will because the impressions are there inside, we will simply feel tormented. Oh, I can't give this up. This is not really helpful. But what we can do is we can use our willpower to persist in creating positive impressions. Or if it's yeah.
I have a tendency to take this on a more practical level, because
yeah, sure.
I've noticed in the monk mode here in Atlanta, we have boys who are from various different backgrounds, and definitely they have a lot of scars. And you know, I have a lot of willpower as well for material adventures. And so now in the monk mode, because it's a very strict lifestyle, waking up 3 a.m, taking a cold shower, jumping out of bed with the first alarm, buzzing, running to the ashram and praying and doing 2 hours of yoga, reading and giving, sharing realizations. It's a lot on their mind. But I've noticed that they just persist, and because they have good sangha, good association, because they persist and persist and persist, the willpower becomes stronger and stronger to maintain their sadhana, because they actually start to derive a certain taste for it. So much so, even if there is a party going on, like yesterday there was a party going on in North Atlanta, a spiritual party, is very tempting. Vaiseshika Prabhu was sharing a lot of nectar, and they're like, no, we have to wake up. Our curfew is 7:30 p.m. And so they did their pros and cons and their willpower, even though it was very attractive to go to that party, they stayed back so they could, do their morning sadhana routine. So I've noticed a lot of change happens when we are very, very strict with our daily morning sadhana. Many of the attendees, they know that they have learned the Bhakti Kriya, and it's difficult alone. Why should I do it? But once they wake up in the morning and they do their Bhakti Kriya every single morning, then it becomes part of their habit where it's who they are. It almost feels like there is a completely a neurochemical shift in their bodies, because they start to glow and people start to notice that there's a level of calm in their lives. So when you're talking about this principle of using those persistent in creating a positive impression, it is really, really a very big key into changing and breaking away from any kind of habits that have been subconsciously formed in our lives from childhood.
I love that point, Veda. And I love that point because the persistence in sadhana, there was such a big difference that I noticed in spiritual practices versus material practices. Because like, even if you're doing something materially that is quote unquote good, like say like exercise, for me, as like someone with a really kind of intense addictive personality, when I got into running cross country in high school, I went all in. I went so hard. I trained hours a day to the point where I started having health issues, thyroid issues. I started passing out. Like I ended up hurting myself. But this was supposed to be something like that's good. It's good to go running. It's good to get outside, get some fresh air, get exercise. But for me and my addictive personality, I took it and I just went all in, and it ended up being bad for me. But with spiritual practices, what I've seen is it's like you can be as persistent as you want to be, and it's only taking you up. Like it's like, it's so wonderful. There's like no stealing. You just can keep going, doing the practices over and over, and it's only taking you up. Same thing with like success. I got really into like achievement and degrees, but really then you get stressed, you get competitive, you get into like making money, and then it's like how more money, and it's just like, and all these things don't really lead to happiness. So even things that like in our culture, are good, to some point they are, but what I learned, it's like they're only good if they support the spiritual practice, because the spiritual practice is what will take you to the highest. The other material things have a ceiling. That was my experience. Another reason I love these teachings. But
yes, thank you. Very nicely put. See, there are material, you can say material goods. I'm just using the word goods for general sense. And there are, you can say, spiritual goods. So not gods, sorry, goods. So something which is good materially, something which is good spiritually. So the materially good things, they are meant to be means. And it is a spiritually good thing that are the ends. Okay, I need wealth, I need health. For what? So that I can become a better person, so that I can direct my love towards higher things, towards ultimately to the divine reality, towards Krishna. But then this is a healthy situation. But if material goods are not just the means, but also the ends, then it leads to, sooner or later, it leads to some kind of downfall. If wealth is important, but if wealth is all that a person is seeking, making money is important, but what you are making with money is even more important. And if you don't have anything else to make, then the pursuit of money can come at the cost of relationship, at the cost of health, at the cost of spirituality, the person just becomes lonely. Similarly, with respect to health also. Health is important to take care of our health. But if taking care of the health is the only purpose of life, well, the body is going to deteriorate eventually. Then it is going to be futile eventually. But even then, it's not fulfilling. So the downfall means that eventually it is futile. That you, even if you earn a lot of money, eventually, what is the point of it? We are going to lose it. And intermediately also, it is unfulfilling. You might get it, but it doesn't fulfill us. So I thought the spiritual dimension life is very important.
Yeah, it almost becomes like destructive. Like even something materially good can become destructive.
Oh, you can see that it is
right?
Unfulfilling at best or destructive even at worst. Yes. So now, yeah, please, Ravida.
It material achievements, it is, I don't think it's a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, and it's just sometimes I feel like it's nice to find a balance, because I've noticed in spiritual communities when they emphasize a lot of, oh, just be spiritual, don't pursue material. And then next thing you know, you have spiritual life together, but materially you don't have food on the table and a place to stay. And, not everybody in your family are going to be on the same page. And then there's disharmony in the family. So I think material success, material achievements are very good, provided that, and it can be very constructive, provided that we understand that everything that we have in this world materially is not going to be fulfilling, and that we need to add more to that bucket in order to feel fulfilled.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Because I've noticed, when you go to India, you see a lot of people who are, sages and saints and even just sadhus. They don't have anything. And, they're good. But at the same time, when you have a society, when you have families and responsibilities and communities, then when you don't have that material success, then what happens is you're not able to, then you're more concerned about the material aspect of things because you're consciously not fully there, but you're on the way there. So there is a level of, I think, a spiritual bypass that I like to consider that comes in place when we don't add into the element of spirituality with our material success. So there has to be this beautiful balance of material success with spiritual success. And spiritual success breeds material success, and understanding the principle of success. Is the spiritual and the material energies and their relationships.
I appreciate.
Just 1 minute. What I depicted was that reflecting what you were saying, Veda. In some ways, you could have a pendulum where somebody can pursue material at the expense of the spiritual, and that is what is happening to a large extent in mainstream society. But because of that, there is often a reaction, and the reaction can go to the extreme where you can say in religious or other, sometimes religious societies, people can go to the other extreme where you just neglect the material. But that is not desirable, that is not sustainable, that is not the teaching of the Gita at all. Because ultimately the material is not immaterial. The material matters. Health matters. Like you said, somebody will neglect their wealth or health. But then afterwards, they have to spend all their energy trying to get their basics right, and there's no time for spirituality. So both need to go together. And then eventually, as both are growing, we use the material for the purpose of spiritual. Yeah.
Can we do a recap on this?
On this point or the whole session?
Overall, because I think because of time's sake.
Yeah, yes. Radha, you wanted to say something before we finish?
Yeah,
I'll
I was
cut you off
just
at this.
thinking, like what I was saying earlier, for me, I think it's more of like an internal shift. Like it's not that I experienced that achievement was bad, but it was my mindset around that achievement, my motive for why I was trying to achieve that was hurting me. So when I ended up even leaving my job, I think I had got to the point where I didn't mind staying or leaving. I was ready to just do whatever would be best for my spiritual practice. And I remember talking to Kastuba Prabhu about this when I was getting guidance on leaving, and I was like, honestly, I could stay and be happy, or I could leave and be happy. So it's more reflective of like the internal shift. So it's not bad to achieve; it's great to achieve, but you don't want to achieve for ego's sake or to fulfill some kind of to prove yourself worthy or something of that nature. You want to achieve so that you can use it in Krishna's or in higher service, because that's what will really be happy, make you happy, I guess, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yes, you could,
That
you
clarification.
can say that it is material achievement is not just for the purpose of accumulation. Oh, I got this much money, this much wealth, this much property, this many cars. We want to have material achievement so that we can make a contribution. If somebody has material comforts, material facilities, material knowledge, material assets, they can all use them in for a higher purpose. So with this higher purpose, then it works out very well. So yes, I'll quickly try to summarize. So we started by discussing about the self-destructive force that is there within all of us, and its characteristic that it is boundaryless and it can make us seem helpless. So then, and Radha mentioned that actually when we have to say no, if saying no, it is much easier done through relationships. If there's relationships and then there are rules, then they are easier to follow. So in the bhakti path, the focus is on the relationship with God. And because the focus on the relationship with Him, it becomes easier to follow. That applies in all relationships. Then we talk about in general, the positive way of growing. So we replace, not reject. So there are of course, so for this purpose, we discuss how impressions are formed, how the samskaras are formed inside, and how they can be changed. Then we talked about for when we have to change ourselves, inner change, it involves two things. There are boundaries. That is, we have to protect ourselves, but there are bonds. In connection with bonds, I talked about the triangular desires as compared to linear desires. And then we discussed also about last point that so when we are saying no to material things, we are trying to material cravings. That doesn't mean that we reject the material. Rather, it is that we use the material for the spiritual, and that is the balance. So it is not that material desires themselves are bad. It is not that materially good things are also good, provided they are contributing to a spiritual good. Okay. Any concluding points, reflections you kind of?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, we can take one question maybe, or anybody would like to share their takeaways. If we can come back to the main screen, if there is one takeaway, or if anybody would like to share anything, if you don't mind to raise your hand, we'll do a quick takeaway.